While I've been to Fun Spot Orlando, which is located right across the highway from Universal, I was completely unprepared for the mess that is Fun Spot Atlanta. I would have described it as the sketchiest park I've ever been to, if not for having been to Mount Olympus and the Wisconsin Dells, but it's definitely up there in terms of poor operations. It's literally just rides in a parking lot, and a lot of disinterested staff who I don't trust to operate anything safely. It's also kind of weird, because looking at the western town facades that cover the one single air-conditioned building, you can tell that this used to be something else, something which I thought was probably a lot more exciting as I was walking around. So, doing a bit of research, I was actually quite wrong. The original park opened in 1990 as Dixieland Fun Park, which is an unfortunate name, but also it was Georgia in the 90s, so I'm not entirely surprised. Originally, it was just mini golf, but rides were quickly added, and while I thought that maybe the western facades pointed to something more exciting, it was still literally just rides in a parking lot, and it didn't really look any different from what you'll find there today. In 2012, it was renamed to Fun Junction USA, and then bought out by Fun Spot in 2017, which makes sense as this does seem on brand for the kind of parks that they run. This is maybe the kind of cheap amusement park they might bring your kid to if you have nothing better to do, because there's really nothing of note here. Or at least I would have said that was the case, if not for ArieForce One. Yeah, this cheap parking lot carnival has a world-class coaster sitting in the back that beckons you in, and Fun Spot was certainly successful in drawing me in too. If you're not a coaster person, then what makes ArieForce One remarkable is that it was manufactured by Rocky Mountain Construction, or RMC, a coaster manufacturer that has been rocking the industry over the past decade, saving old wooden coasters by fusing them with new steel track. While ArieForce One was built from the ground up and opened in March of 2023, it's still remarkable through its design and intensity. In fact, this is the best RMC that I've been on, and while I'm not as well traveled as I would like to be, for me, ArieForce One outshines every other RMC I've been on, even Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens Tampa. That's already considered top tier by enthusiasts, so I think that a lot of people will take my opinion as being contrarian for the sake of doing so. But no, legitimately, I thought ArieForce One was way more interesting. Before we get into why I thought that ArieForce One was so exceptional, let's quickly discuss its layout and what it does. When you first walk to the back of the park, you pass under the sign attached to its track and move through a courtyard, where here, you'll probably notice an abandoned western theming element. It seemed interesting, and I wondered, was it a former dark ride or maybe some sort of scenic train? Nope, it was actually just a backdrop for mini golf. Heading to the entrance of ArieForce One, you walk into a small building, and to my surprise, there was a bit of light theming here. You'll see some drawings of rockets and mostly garage components, but the coaster does have some dumb story about a kid named John Arie who wants to grow up and fly into space. From the red, white, and blue color scheme, and from the name which sounds like a spin on the US Air Force, I assumed that the theme of the coaster had to do with a fighter jet, which would have been fine, but there's actually a thin, contrived story that you would never know unless you watched a 40-second video on the Fun Spot YouTube channel. Boarding the ride and heading out of the station, you slowly bounce through 2 consecutive bunny hops, which give you surprising pops of airtime before falling onto the chain of the lift hill. After making your way to the crest, which stands 154 feet tall, you fly down a steep drop, achieving the coaster's top speed of 54 miles per hour, and twist into a dive loop. Pulling out, the train slams over a short hop and twists you into a stall, then flying up and out to the right to throw you out of the seat. You then proceed through the parking lot by hopping through 2 larger hills, and reaching the arcade building, you twist through a surprise barrel roll. Banking right, you then twist through another roll, moving the train to the last segment of track, which is a series of 5 hills, all bucking you out of the seat, before abruptly stopping you on the brake run that leads back to the station. It's by no means the largest RMC out there. In fact, it looks quite small when compared to the 206-foot lift hill of Iron Gwazi. With that said, what makes ArieForce One better than one of the most critically acclaimed coasters in recent history? Let me first start by saying that while I like big intense coasters quite a bit, my opinion of them is often very out of step with what most coaster enthusiasts value, which usually is just intensity for the sake of intensity. For example, X2 at Six Flags Magic Mountain is valuable to many people through the novelty of its seating and sheer forcefulness, but while many enthusiasts love it, this was an experience that I found to be extremely unpleasant. Someone described it to me as getting into an accident and having your car flip multiple times on the highway, and I agree, that's probably what that scenario would feel like. As you flip chaotically through the layout, your legs slam painfully onto the seat, and it's highly, unpleasantly disorienting. Many coaster enthusiasts usually love it though, and that's what tells me that they seek out intensity purely for the sake of intensity, which I don't think makes for a good coaster. When I get on a large coaster, I appreciate strong positive G-forces, fast whippy turns and inversions, and all of this done with a decent degree of comfortability. A lot of enthusiasts write off B&Ms as boring and safe, but they're the perfect kind of coaster to me, offering that intense experience with relatively comfortable restraints. As the industry has changed, negative Gs on coasters have risen in popularity, and with the exception of powerful ejector airtime, I don't find floating through inversions or getting yanked down to be particularly interesting or exciting. When Universal first opened the Velocicoaster for previews, I was very excited to ride, but after having seen it being built for years, having finally gone through its exciting queue and getting on the ride, I came off shrugging my shoulders and thinking that it was underwhelming. The launches feel forceless, not even driving you back into the seat, and the first two inversions are all floater airtime, which feel like nothing. The ejector airtime into the roll at the end is great, but otherwise, I don't find Velocicoaster very interesting. I can certainly acknowledge that from a layout and pacing perspective, it's a top tier experience, but it just doesn't offer what I find to be fun or interesting in a coaster. At the time when Velocicoaster opened, I had not been on an RMC, but the reputation was already legendary, and I was excited to finally try one. In the summer of 2022, I visited Six Flags Great America, and finally I would ride my first RMC with Goliath. I watched the train run off of the intimidating lift hill, and brimming with anticipation, I got on and experienced it, only to come off, well, underwhelmed and wondering why I didn't like it. Later that year, I experienced Twisted Colossus at Magic Mountain, appreciating its ejector air and whippy transitions, and coming off feeling that it was a lot more interesting than Goliath. I should also mention that I enjoyed their recently opened single-rail Wonder Woman Flight of Courage for the same reason as well. Finally then, I had the opportunity to get on Iron Gwazi, a coaster with an important legacy in replacing the original legendary Gwazi, and intimidating parkgoers through its sheer size and intensity. And you know what? Coming off of it, I found it to again be underwhelming, whipping you around a bit, but with two forceless inversions that you float through, and coming to a shoulder shrug of a stop. Like Velocicoaster, I'm going to acknowledge that this is a top tier experience and many people love it, but for me personally, it just feels very one note, and not particularly interesting. For reference on what I do like, my favorite coaster at Busch Gardens is Montu, with its strong G-forces, frequent inversions, whippy transitions, and overall comfortability. So with all of this said, why do I prefer ArieForce One over every other RMC I've tried? While ArieForce One doesn't have much in the way of positive Gs throughout its course, what I do like are the unrelenting inversions, whippy track elements, and the frequent excessive ejector airtime. It's a coaster that throws you around with relative comfortability, yet is still intense enough to actually provide a high level of thrill. That's what's missing from Iron Gwazi, that while it may be strikingly taller with a beyond vertical drop, and achieves unrelenting speed, the two inversions have no degree of whippiness, and none of the layout has you flying out and trying to hold onto the seat. It's just fast, and I don't think that's interesting. When ArieForce One aggressively pops you out to the side or whips you through a surprise inversion, it feels a lot more exciting and intense, leading to a more fulfilling ride experience. Again, not that Iron Gwazi or any other RMCs are bad experiences, but this is really just a matter of personal preference, and ArieForce One is by far my favorite in terms of what I like to experience on a coaster. That said though, operations were pretty rough on this, and from my observation, the rest of the park seemed to be just as bad. While the other fun spot parks in Orlando have free parking, the Atlanta location has a small parking booth where you pay $5. In exchange, you get a card where you can apply the $5 to whatever ticket you buy, which is $7 per ride for the smaller attractions, or $12 per ride for the more thrilling ones, including ArieForce One. The pricing is pretty ridiculous, which I think is intentional, as the park wants you to buy a $30 day pass for unlimited rides and go-karts instead, but since I only went specifically for ArieForce One, I spent only $24 for myself and one other person to ride it. I don't know how it is with the other rides, but absolutely nobody was checking tickets when I got to the coaster, and if I really wanted to, I easily could have marathoned this for free, having only paid $5 to park. I also saw many concerning safety issues, with ride staff leaving control panels to walk around the station and talk to each other, even kicking their feet casually over the ride track once the train dispatched. Walking around the park, some attractions were closed, and the ones that were operating seemed to be in rough shape, desperately needing paint, and I also suspect not reaching acceptable maintenance standards. The park did not have much shade, and where you did find it, you also found plenty of fire ants nesting near the picnic tables. Walking into the building with the western facade, there was a small food counter with your typical amusement park offerings, and nearby there were also indoor bumper cars. Heading a bit further back, the building did also have a decently sized arcade as well, back near some rooms which I assume might be for birthday parties. Overall, Fun Spot Atlanta is best described as a barely functioning dump that happens to have a world-class coaster, which isn't to say that you shouldn't make a trip out here, but you're not going to find much value outside of ArieForce One. It's maybe an okay place if you're an Atlanta local and you want to bring your kids somewhere for relatively cheap, but as I discussed in the past few videos with the world-class Georgia Aquarium and the strange but entertaining World of Coca-Cola, there are many better options to choose from in and around the city. Still, ArieForce One was a standout that's worth traveling a bit out of your way for if you're a coaster enthusiast, and I did very much enjoy the novelty of the ride for the price, even if I could have actually gone on it for no more than the price of parking. If you enjoyed this video, or whatever else I produce on this channel, I would very much appreciate it if you left a like. As always, if you have not yet hit the subscribe button with bell notification yet either, you can also do so now to be alerted to new videos as they're released.